The wind whispered through the forgotten pines as a worn-out veteran stepped from his battered truck, holding his daughter's tiny hand. His name was Ethan Ward, and this ruined wooden lodge, bought with his final $950, was their last chance at a home. Beside him, Hunter, his loyal German shepherd, froze, hackles raised, staring into the shadows. Something unseen pulsed beneath the soil, a presence that made even the bravest dog tremble. Ethan tried to laugh it off, but deep down, the soldier in him knew this was no ordinary place. A home doesn't breathe like this. A house doesn't watch you back. Yet his daughter smiled up at him, full of hope. He forced a smile and whispered, "We'll make it ours." But as the door creaked open, Hunter growled again, at something that wasn't there. Thank you for watching this story on Emotional Edge, where every tale reminds us that kindness, courage, and loyalty still matter. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Your support helps us keep sharing heartfelt stories that bring warmth, hope, and humanity back into our world. From all of us here, and from every loyal dog and quiet hero we honor, thank you for being part of our family. Thank you for being here with us. And now, let's continue our story. Ethan Ward had never believed in luck. It had never believed in him either. After 12 years of service and one too many nightmares, he found himself living in a cold, dented trailer on the edge of Spokane with his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, and his loyal German shepherd, Hunter. Nights were long and silent except for the distant hum of freight trains and the soft wheeze of the heater trying to stay alive. Ethan's savings had shrunk to a trembling $950, the last remains of his wife's insurance after medical bills devoured the rest. Every evening, he scrolled through hopeless job ads, security guard, warehouse loader, janitor, but panic attacks and flashbacks had cost him every position. His hands still shook at loud noises, his chest tightened at diesel fumes. He was a soldier out of war, but never out of battle. Then, one sleepless night, a listing appeared on a forgotten county website. Foreclosure auction, Lot 12B, Timber Lodge, 5 acres, starting bid $900. The photo was grainy, a house swallowed by trees, roof half collapsed, but it looked solid, and more importantly, it was his price. Against every rational thought, Ethan saw a mission. He pictured Lily running barefoot through grass instead of sleeping beside peeling aluminum walls. The next morning, he walked into the courthouse dressed in worn jeans and an old flannel, surrounded by men in suits who didn't notice him. When the bidding began, silence filled the room. No one wanted the isolated ruin. Ethan raised his hand, heart hammering. 900! The auctioneer's gavel came down like a rifle shot. Sold. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. He'd just traded everything for a dream, held together by rot and desperation. Driving home, Lily chatted with the kind of joy only children could afford, asking if her new room could be pink, if Hunter could have a yard. Ethan answered with a cracked voice that sounded almost hopeful. "Yes, sweetheart, it's ours now." But as the highway turned into gravel and pine shadows grew taller, Hunter began to whine softly from the back seat. The forest pressed closer, heavy with silence. By the time they reached the narrow trail to their new home, Ethan's gut had twisted into something colder than fear. The soldier inside him whispered, "This place isn't empty. It's waiting." The dirt road that led to the property was barely more than a trail swallowed by pine and bramble. When Ethan stopped the truck, the air smelled of moss, rain, and something older, like the earth itself was holding its breath. The lodge stood in a small clearing, its roof sagging, windows gaping like blind eyes, porch half collapsed beneath decades of neglect. Yet through the decay, Ethan saw bones of strength, thick cedar beams, stone foundation, the ghost of what had once been a proud frontier home. Lily pressed her face against the window, wide-eyed. "Daddy, it looks like a castle." He smiled faintly, forcing warmth into his voice. "Then it's our castle." Hunter, however, didn't share her wonder. The moment the door opened, he leapt down, tail low, ears flat, nose twitching hard. His growl rolled from deep in his chest, low and uneasy. Ethan crouched, rubbing his fur. "Easy, boy. It's just new smells." But he knew that wasn't true. In Afghanistan, that sound had meant only one thing: danger close. They stepped onto the porch, which groaned under their weight. Dust floated in shafts of sunlight piercing through broken planks. Inside, the air was heavy, tinged with mold and rust. Furniture sat where time had left it. A toppled chair, a cracked lamp, an old journal turned to stone by damp. Lily tiptoed across the warped floorboards, humming softly, her voice fragile in the stillness. Hunter stayed by the door, staring down the dark hallway that led deeper inside. His amber eyes followed something unseen. Ethan spent the afternoon cleaning, stacking debris outside and checking the structure. Beneath the grime, he found traces of beauty. Hand-carved banisters, initials etched into the mantel. A faded photo of a man and woman smiling in front of the same porch decades earlier. When the sun dipped low, a pickup truck rumbled up the trail. A wiry woman in her 70s climbed out, grey hair tied in a bandana, eyes sharp as glass. "You must be the one who bought the Hale place," she said, leaning on the gate. "Name's Martha Green. Lived down the road since before that house went dark." Ethan nodded cautiously. "Why do they call it the Hale place?" Her gaze shifted toward the lodge. "Belonged to a journalist named David Hale. He went missing 20 years ago after asking the wrong questions about the wrong man, Gregory Sloan. Since then, no one stayed here longer than a week." Ethan felt a coldness settle in his spine. The house creaked behind him, as if it recognized its name. Hunter growled again, staring into the open doorway where the light no longer reached. That night, the forest pressed close around the cabin, whispering through the cracks like a living thing. The roof moaned with every gust of wind, and the fire Ethan built refused to burn steady, crackling weakly as if starved of air. Lily had fallen asleep on the couch wrapped in his old army jacket, her small hands clutching Hunter's fur. The dog didn't sleep. He lay alert, eyes locked on the doorway, muscles taut, ears twitching at sounds Ethan couldn't hear. The veteran sat by the fire, staring into the flames' weak dance, wondering if he'd just doomed his daughter by chasing a dream too fragile to survive the real world. His thoughts drifted to his wife, gone 3 winters ago, and the promise he'd made by her hospital bed. "I'll keep her safe, always." The words tasted like rust now. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the shattered window, softening the room's ruin. Ethan decided to start clearing the outbuildings first, small victories before facing the house itself. He made Lily a breakfast of canned fruit and crackers, kissed her forehead, and stepped into the overgrown yard. The barn loomed behind the lodge, half collapsed, its roof swallowed by ivy and moss. Inside, it smelled of rot and oil. Rusted tools hung crooked on the walls. As he lifted a fallen beam, a sharp crack split the air beneath his boots. The floorboard gave way, plunging his leg through rotten wood. Swearing under his breath, Ethan pulled free and looked down. Beneath the broken plank, darkness yawned, a hollow space where there shouldn't be one. Heart pounding, he fetched his flashlight and knelt. Dust motes swirled in the beam as it cut into the void. There, half buried in dirt and cobwebs, lay a metal ammo box, paint flaking, latches rusted but intact. Ethan pried it open with his knife. Inside, wrapped in crumbling newspaper, was a leather-bound notebook, its cover cracked, corners curled with age. The first page bore neat handwriting: David Hale, Operation Redwood. Beneath the name were dates, notes, sketches of maps, and words like toxic runoff, bribes, Sloan. Ethan flipped through, each page heavier than the last. It wasn't just a journal, it was evidence. He felt the eyes of the forest on him, the weight of the house watching through its shattered windows. Hunter whined softly, stepping backward as though sensing the ghost of the man who'd written those pages. Ethan closed the notebook and whispered to himself, "What the hell did you uncover, Hale?" Behind him, a door somewhere in the house creaked open on its own. By the third day, Ethan began to think he could outwork the house's ghosts. He patched broken window panes, swept away rot, and nailed loose boards until sweat mixed with sawdust on his arms. For the first time in years, there was a rhythm to his exhaustion, something close to peace. But that illusion cracked when Hunter stopped dead in the middle of the living room. The big shepherd's head tilted, ears pricked toward the stone fireplace that dominated the wall. His fur rippled as a growl built deep in his throat. "It's okay, buddy," Ethan murmured, but his voice trembled. Hunter's paws scratched at the hearth, nails scraping on stone. He barked once, sharp, insistent, then sniffed, circling, as if tracking a scent that didn't belong to the living. Ethan crouched beside him, running his hand across the cold, grey masonry. The fireplace had been hand-built, every stone different, fitted with the patience of another era. But one block near the base felt off, its mortar darker, the surface faintly hollow under his touch. "You see something, boy?" Hunter pawed again, whining this time, eyes locked on that single stone. From behind, Lily's voice piped up softly. "Daddy, that one's wobbly." Ethan froze. From her low angle on the dusty floor, she could see what he couldn't, the edge slightly recessed, the color not quite matching. Heart pounding, he grabbed his crowbar. With one careful push, the stone groaned and slid free, revealing a small square hole hidden deep in the wall. Inside lay a tin box, old but surprisingly intact. He reached in and pulled it out, setting it gently on the floor. Lily crouched beside him, breathless with curiosity, while Hunter stood watch, tail stiff. Ethan pried open the lid. Inside were several rolls of 35mm film, their labels faded, and a microcassette tape, the kind reporters once carried in their pockets. There was no treasure, no gold, no money, only silence and dust and the weight of something human. The tape was labeled in tight handwriting, "For the record." Ethan stared at it, his reflection caught in the dull metal surface. Every instinct told him this was what David Hale had died protecting. The house wasn't cursed. It was keeping a secret. Outside, wind swept through the pines, making the windows rattle like bones. Hunter leaned close, sniffing the tin, and let out a low whine that almost sounded like grief. Ethan whispered, more to himself than anyone, "Looks like we just found the ghost's voice." The following morning broke grey and cold, the forest draped in mist that clung to the trees like a veil. Ethan couldn't shake the unease that had settled over him since finding the tin box. The film, the tape, each object felt heavier than metal, carrying the echo of someone else's final moments. He placed them carefully in his backpack next to David Hale's notebook, then loaded Lily into the truck. "We're going into town," he told her, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Hunter jumped into the back, his amber gaze scanning the tree line as though memorizing every shadow before they left. The drive into Pine Creek was tense. Every rustle of branches felt like movement, every passing car like a watchful eye. The town itself looked peaceful, rows of old shops, a diner with a flickering neon sign. But there was something hollow in the way people stared at strangers. Ethan parked beside a small pawn shop and stepped inside. The air smelled of oil and dust. Behind the counter sat an old man with silver hair and eyes sharp enough to cut glass. "Need something?" he asked. Ethan held up the cassette. "A player that can run this." The man disappeared into a back room and returned with a small grey recorder. $20. Ethan paid cash, his fingers trembling slightly as he took it. Back in the truck, he inserted the tape. At first, there was only static, a hiss like distant rain. Then a voice broke through, tense and low. "This is for the record. October 12, 2005, speaking with a confidential source regarding Pine Creek timber acquisitions." Ethan froze. It was David Hale's voice. Another voice followed, shaking with fear. "They're dumping the chemicals in the forest, the ones Croft bought after the fires. Barrels buried near the old tracks. It's poisoning the water." Ethan's heart pounded as the man continued, voice breaking into a sob. "I tried to report it. Next day, my car was run off the road. They said it was an accident." Ethan's grip on the recorder tightened. He looked out the windshield at the quiet town that suddenly seemed sinister, the air too still. He understood now. Hale hadn't disappeared. He'd been silenced. The tape ended with a harsh click, leaving only the sound of his own breathing. Hunter shifted in the back seat, letting out a low growl, as if he too understood the danger in the truth they now carried. Ethan stared at the road ahead, his jaw set. "All right," he murmured. "If this is what he died for, we'll finish it." By the end of that week, the forest had turned against them. Rain came in thin, cold sheets that turned the ground to mud and the air to breathless silence. Ethan spent each day repairing what he could, patching the roof, fixing leaks, pretending the house could still become a home. But his mind was no longer in the work. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard David Hale's voice crackling through the recorder, the desperate whistleblower begging for protection, the sound of fear so real it left fingerprints on his thoughts. He couldn't tell Lily what he'd heard. She still played on the porch, calling the house their castle, her laughter clashing with the house's groans. Hunter never left her side. The dog had grown restless, pacing, sniffing the air as if expecting something to arrive. That something came 2 days later. A sleek black sedan rolled slowly up the dirt drive, its polished surface reflecting the grey sky like a dark mirror. Ethan's stomach dropped. He stepped outside, wiping his hands on his jeans, posture calm but ready. The driver's door opened, and a man in a perfectly tailored grey suit stepped out, smiling with the smoothness of someone who had practiced the expression in a mirror. "Mr. Ward," he said, voice rich and rehearsed. "My name's Henderson. I represent Cascade Holdings, a development company interested in acquiring this property." Ethan crossed his arms. "Not for sale?" Henderson chuckled softly. "Everything's for sale, Mr. Ward. We'll offer you $50,000. Cash. No questions." The number hit like a bullet. 50,000 could fix his truck, give Lily a real school, buy peace. But something in the man's eyes, cold, calculating, made his skin crawl. Hunter stepped forward, teeth bared, a low, vibrating growl rolling through his chest. Henderson's smile faltered for the first time. "You should think carefully," he said. "This land has a complicated history. Unforeseen problems can arise." Ethan took a step closer, his voice low. "You and your boss already know what's buried here, don't you?" Henderson's mask slipped just for a second. The look beneath it was pure steel. Then the smile returned. "The offer stands for 48 hours. He slid a business card into Ethan's hand and turned back to the car. When the sedan disappeared down the road, Hunter barked furiously, chasing its echo into the trees. Ethan flipped the card in his hand. North Cascade Holdings, Portland address. He searched it that night. Nothing. No record, no company, no office. Just a deadline and an empty name. The next morning, the air smelled wrong. Metallic. Sharp. Ethan went to the old well and pumped the handle. The water that gushed out looked clean but reeked faintly of chemicals. Hunter growled and shoved his body between Ethan and the bucket. When Ethan leaned closer, he caught the scent, acidic, artificial, poison. Someone had come in this night. He turned toward the house, jaw set. This wasn't a warning anymore. It was a war. The next dawn broke under a sky the color of steel. The rain had stopped, but the silence that replaced it was worse. Every inch of the forest felt tense, as if holding its breath. Ethan hadn't slept. He'd spent the night pacing the floor, his mind replaying the hiss of poisoned water, the cut brake line, and the grey-suited man's smile that hit a threat sharper than any weapon. He knew now that what David Hale had uncovered, what was buried beneath this land, was powerful enough to kill for. But the notebook, the film, and the tape couldn't be everything. There had to be more, something Hale had hidden where no one could find it. Hunter was restless that morning, moving from window to window, tail low, ears twitching. When Ethan opened the door, the dog bolted outside, pausing only to glance back, as if demanding to be followed. "Show me, boy," Ethan whispered, grabbing a shovel and his old crowbar. He told Lily to stay by the truck and keep her favorite red blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The child nodded solemnly. She had learned enough to recognize fear when her father tried to hide it. Hunter led him past the barn and through the wet undergrowth, moving with purpose. They crossed a small stream and entered a thicket where sunlight barely pierced the canopy. The air grew heavy, rich with the scent of pine and damp earth. Then Hunter stopped. He stood before a cluster of moss-covered boulders, his body rigid, nose pressed to the ground. With a sharp bark, he began to dig, flinging dirt behind him with frantic precision. Ethan dropped to his knees beside him, heart pounding. He dug until his hands ached, until the shovel struck something that didn't sound like stone or root. A dull, hollow thud. He cleared the soil away with trembling hands. Buried beneath the earth was a black waterproof pelican case, military grade, sealed and pristine despite the years. Ethan pulled it free and set it on the moss. For a long moment, he simply stared, afraid to open it. Hunter sat beside him, panting softly, his gaze steady and calm, as if he understood what this meant. Finally, Ethan pried the latches. The seal hissed open, revealing foam-packed contents, each item carefully placed with soldier-like precision. Inside was a sealed envelope, a rolled map bound with leather, and a brass key attached to a tag marked Box 307, Liberty First Bank, Seattle. He opened the envelope. The handwriting was unmistakable. David Hales. "If you've found this, it means I'm gone. The evidence that can destroy Sloan is in Box 307 at Liberty First Bank. Don't trust anyone in Pine Creek. They are his." Ethan's breath caught. Hale had left not just proof, but a mission. He looked down at the dog beside him, at the steady eyes that had led him here. "Good boy," he whispered, his throat tight. In that still clearing, beneath the endless pines, Ethan realized something. The fight wasn't over, and now he wasn't just a veteran or a father. He was the keeper of a dead man's truth. By morning, Ethan's mind had sharpened into the calm focus he used to feel before a mission. Fear was gone, replaced by something colder, harder. He packed the map, the key, and David Hale's letter into his duffel bag, sealing it with duct tape. He checked his truck. The severed brake line had been crudely patched the day before, but it wouldn't last long. He didn't care. He only needed it to last until Seattle. Before leaving, he knelt before Lily, who sat on the porch steps clutching her stuffed bear. "I need you to be brave, sweetheart," he said softly, brushing a strand of auburn hair from her face. "Daddy's got to take care of something important. You'll stay here with Miss Martha and Hunter. He'll keep you safe." Lily nodded, her lower lip trembling. "You promise you'll come back?" Ethan forced a smile. "Always." Hunter whined low, sensing what was about to happen. Ethan gripped the dog's head with both hands, looking into those amber eyes that had seen him through battles men couldn't imagine. "Guard her," he whispered. "That's an order." Hunter pressed his forehead to Ethan's knee. A silent vow. Then, with one last look at the two souls who gave his life meaning, he turned toward the truck and drove away. The highway to Seattle stretched long and empty, the pine-covered hills rolling past like ghosts of another world. Ethan stayed off the main interstates, sticking to county roads. Every car behind him felt like a shadow. Every black SUV made his grip tighten on the wheel. Twice he pulled over, heart pounding, certain he was being followed. But the roads remained silent. When the city skyline finally rose in the distance, it felt unreal, a wall of grey glass and noise after so many days of quiet fear. At Liberty First Bank, Ethan presented the key and identification from the case. The clerk hesitated, then guided him to a small vault room. Box 307 slid from the steel wall with a metallic click. Inside lay a stack of ledgers, contracts with forged signatures, and a microcassette labeled GS Final. Gregory Sloane's initials. Ethan played it on the recorder he'd brought. Hale's voice came first, steady but strained. Then Sloane's followed, venomous. "You think you can expose me? You'll disappear like the rest." The tape ended in a burst of static. Ethan leaned against the cold vault wall, his heart steady now. The truth was here, enough to end decades of corruption. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. A voice answered. "Ward, that you?" It was Mark Riley, his former commanding officer, now an FBI agent. Ethan exhaled. "I've got something big, Mark. Real big. And they already tried to kill me for it." Riley's tone hardened instantly. "Stay put. Lock the door. We're coming." For the first time in years, Ethan felt something he thought he'd lost on the battlefield. Backup. Ethan barely slept that night. The motel room in downtown Seattle buzzed with the faint hum of traffic and neon lights, but beneath it all lay the pulse of danger. The documents, photos, and recordings from Box 307 were spread across the bed like puzzle pieces of a dead man's final message. Hale had risked everything to expose the truth. Now that truth sat in Ethan's hands. He checked the lock on the door again, then the window. Paranoia was second nature by now. It had kept him alive too many times to question it. Just before dawn, a quiet knock sounded, 2 sharp taps followed by 1 long. Ethan's chest tightened until a familiar voice called softly, "Ward, it's me." He opened the door to find Mark Riley, older now, his hair streaked with grey, but his presence as solid as ever. 2 FBI agents flanked him, their badges gleaming under the hallway light. "You did the right thing, Ethan," Mark said, gripping his shoulder. "You just cracked open one of the dirtiest cold cases in the state." Together, they packed up the evidence, cataloguing each ledger and contract like sacred artifacts. When Ethan handed over the tape, Mark's jaw tightened. "If this is what I think it is, we've got him." Within hours, federal teams moved on Gregory Sloane's estate in Pine Creek. The raid was swift, surgical. Ethan watched the live news coverage from his motel room. A line of black SUVs crawling up the gravel drive, agents swarming through iron gates, and finally, Sloane himself, dragged out in handcuffs, his once polished arrogance replaced with disbelief and rage. The man who had poisoned land, silenced witnesses, and ruled a county through fear was finally powerless. But the victory was heavier than Ethan expected. Later that evening, Mark called to confirm what Ethan already suspected. "We found Hale," he said quietly, "buried near one of the dump sites. Your dog led you to the right place." Ethan didn't answer. He simply stared out the window at the city lights, the reflection of his weary face merging with the night. Justice had been found, but it came wrapped in sorrow. 2 days later, Ethan drove home. When his truck pulled into Martha Green's driveway, Lily bolted from the porch, her red dress flaring like a spark of life against the grey woods. Hunter was right behind her, barking, tail thrashing in wild joy. Ethan stepped out, and Lily flew into his arms, her laughter muffled against his chest. For the first time in a long time, he let himself cry, not from fear, but from relief. Weeks passed. The townsfolk, freed from Sloane's shadow, began to rebuild. They brought lumber, tools, food, helping Ethan restore the old lodge that had once been a house of ghosts. Now it stood proud again, light glowing warm through new windows. Each hammer strike, each brush of paint felt like redemption. On a golden afternoon, Ethan stood on the porch watching Lily throw a stick for Hunter, their laughter and barking, blending with the sound of wind through the pines. The forest no longer felt heavy. It breathed again. He sipped his coffee, the sunlight spilling across his face, and whispered, "We made it home." In a world where darkness hides behind polished smiles, one man's courage and one dog's instinct brought truth back to light. Ethan Ward didn't seek glory, only a home for his daughter. But fate gave him something greater, a purpose that healed the broken soldier within. Sometimes, justice doesn't wear a badge. Sometimes it wears a scarred heart and walks on four loyal paws.